Yes, we are back here on WLTH 1370 AM, Issues and Answers Friday. My Country with Scott Cannon here. We are getting into some deep weeds here in this Israeli Palestinian conflict. I know this is a very intimidating topic for a lot of people. I know people are very overwhelmed, especially considering that there's a lot of emotion that goes into this conflict, and people don't know where to start. Okay, now obviously this goes back thousands and thousands of years, but we don't have time for that. I only have about an hour and 20 minutes here, and like I said, at 7:30 we're going to talk to Mario Longoni, and in the next segment we're going to do the happy happies. Okay, so I don't have that much time, but so what we're going to do is we're going to start in the 20th century, the decade in which most of us were born. Okay, let's fast forward through all the other stuff. Going into the 20th century, Israel was controlled by the Ottoman Empire, and then the British Empire took over, and this is where we started. This is where our modern conflict starts, right? Okay, so the Gaza Strip is a very narrow strip of land that is between Israel and Egypt on the Mediterranean Sea. It is about the size of Washington, D.C. We're talking about Gaza. Okay, like I said, the Ottoman Empire had it, then the British had it. And really where we start getting into trouble with Israel, or the creation of the modern state of Israel, is in 1917. The British Foreign Minister Balfour, he basically said there will be a Israeli state in what is Palestine, was at that moment an Ottoman region with a small minority Jewish population. Small minority Jewish population. The Balfour Declaration was a public statement that was issued by the British government in 1917 during the First World War that said we are going to support a national home for the Jews in Palestine. There were very few Jews there at the time, mostly Arabs and Christians and stuff. Now, they thought about putting what is now Israel in Uganda, which was British East Africa, because remember, they had colonized Africa, and they were saying, well, maybe we should put Israel in Africa, straight up in Africa. And they also thought about Argentina. Well, should we put it in Argentina? Like, Argentina's got a lot of land. Let's put it in Argentina. They settled on Palestine. Okay. So the Second World War happens. Coming after the Second World War, obviously you cannot justify and even begin to describe the amount of atrocities that happened to the Jews in World War II. I mean, during, the Holocaust, nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, justifies the horrific atrocities that happened to them at the hands of the Nazis and their allies, a lot of whom are now being rehabilitated by the United States and other Western powers because they want to make Nazis sympathetic so that they can justify their support of Ukrainian Nazis and sort of downplay, Nazis being a real danger. Now, to the point where Canada just honored a 98-year-old World War II veteran who swore allegiance to Hitler. He literally swore allegiance to Hitler. Literally, not figuratively, literally swore allegiance to Hitler. And people were outraged, and ultimately Justin Trudeau, who's the Prime Minister of Canada, and the people in the Canadian Parliament all apologized for this. But this is what's happening. Like they are essentially rehabilitating the Nazis so that they can justify helping modern Nazis in the Azov battalion in Ukraine, and oftentimes rewriting history. I just saw a weird tweet from Anthony Blinken a few weeks ago where he's like completely rewriting World War II history and making it seem like somehow Russians were the ones persecuting the Jews, as opposed to the Nazis, who are famous for one thing and one thing only, and that is persecuting the Jews. But that just goes to show you who runs our society. You know, the people in power in our society are, like I said, I don't say that they're not crazy and they're not stupid. They are sociopathic and opportunistic. So anyway, the Balfour Declaration says in 1917 during World War I, there will be a Jewish state in Palestine. Okay, so World War II happens. We all know what happened to the Jews. It was tragic. It was awful. And so everybody says, the Western powers get together and say, okay, this is the perfect time to create a Jewish state in Palestine. Now, after the creation of Israel in 1948, Egypt actually controlled the Gaza Strip for about 2 decades. You know, but in other parts of Israel, the Arabs refer to that time period as al-Nakba, right? Al-Nakba, which is the catastrophe, because all the Jews that were living just about everywhere else in Israel were purged from where they were. In the aftermath of the Arab-Israeli War, the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, that was caused by this sort of forcing of the modern state of Israel, that territory that we talked about, that British Palestine, it was divided into 3 parts. The state of Israel, the Jordanian-held West Bank, and the Egyptian-held Gaza Strip. Of the 950,000 Arabs that lived in the territory that was Israel before the war, 80% fled or were expelled. Only 20% of the Arabs who were in Israel before it was Israel remained in Israel after the 1947 to 1949 Arab-Israeli conflict. That's why it's called the Nakba, the catastrophe by the Arabs. So everybody who's in Palestine today pretty much descends from that 156,000 people. 70% of the population of Gaza consists of refugees and descendants of those refugees, basically. So the population is now 2.1 million people. And half of that is children. Okay. So that's how things were from 1949. They signed an armistice that left Gaza under the Egyptian occupation, and it remained there until 1967. There was the 6-Day War, where Israel and its Arab neighbors went to war, and they gained control of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. So the 6-Day War, the Gaza Strip was taken and occupied by Israel, as well as the West Bank and Golan Heights and the Sinai Peninsula. So that's why you always hear people talk about the 1967 borders, the 1967 borders, the 1967 borders. That's what they're talking about, the 6-Day War. Now, the Six-Day War was fought between Israel and a coalition of Arab states, mostly Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, which started off as British Transjordan in the early 20th century. So again, this sort of all goes back to Great Britain doing what we do now, which is deciding how everybody else gets to live their life, and deciding who gets to go where and who will be in charge of what. Now, for the next 38 years, it controlled the Strip and enabled the construction of 21 Jewish settlements. This has been generally condemned and denounced by the international community at large. But anyway, after this 1967 war, though, you had the establishment of the Palestinian Authority. And things sort of settled down. And up until the 1990s, where we get Bill Clinton in office, and he actually got the PLO and the Israelis, the Palestinian Liberation Organization is the PLO. They signed the Oslo Accord, the Oslo I Accord in 1993, and Oslo II signed in Egypt in 1995. Okay, this was supposed to be a peace process. It was fulfilling the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. The Oslo process began after secret negotiations in Oslo, resulting in both the recognition of the State of Israel by the PLO and the recognition by Israel at the PLO as the representative of the Palestinian people. Okay. Now, the outcomes of the Oslo Accord was the creation of the Palestinian National Authority, which was tasked with the responsibility of conducting limited Palestinian self-government over parts of West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and the international acknowledgement of the PLO as Israel's partner in permanent status negotiations about any remaining issues in the Palestinian and Israeli conflict. Okay, now don't get me wrong. A lot of people in the Palestinian community did not support the Oslo Accords because it did not create a definitive Palestinian state. And Palestinians want their own state. Now, one of the groups of people who did not like the Palestinian state, the Oslo Accord, which did not give the Palestinians their own state, was Hamas. Hamas was actually, and a lot of people don't know this, created by Israel and funded by Israel. Our politician Ron Paul from Texas actually talks about this. He talked about this on the floor of Congress some years ago.
With Gaza right now, we have some moral responsibility for both sides in a way, because we provide help and funding for both Arab nations and Israel. And so we definitely have a moral responsibility, and especially now today, the weapons being used to kill so many Palestinians are American weapons, and American funds essentially are being used for this. But there's a political liability which I think is something that we fail to look at, because too often there's so much blowback from our intervention in areas that we shouldn't be involved in. You know, Hamas, if you look at the history, you'll find out that Hamas was encouraged and really started by Israel, because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat. And you said, well, yeah, that was better then and served its purpose, but we didn't want Hamas to do this. So then we as Americans say, well, we have such a good system, we're going to impose this on the world. We're going to invade Iraq and teach people how to be Democrats. We want free elections. So we encourage the Palestinians to have a free election. They do, and they elect Hamas. So we first indirectly and directly through Israel help establish Hamas. Then we have election. Then Hamas becomes dominant, so we have to kill them. You know, it just doesn't make sense. During the 80s, you know, we were allied with Osama bin Laden. And we were contending with the Soviets. It was at that time our CIA thought it was good if we radicalized the Muslim world. So we financed the madrasa schools to radicalize the Muslims in order to compete with the Soviets. There's too much blowback. There's a lot of reasons why we should oppose this resolution. It is not in the interest of the United States. It's not in the interest of Israel either.
So there you see, you hear Ron Paul, politician, talking about how Israel created Hamas, and they did, because the PLO, the Palestinian Authority, were too moderate, too sympathetic. They wanted to keep things, they wanted to keep up dissension within the Palestinian community, and so they thought that by creating this other state and continuing to fund this state, again, I have to point to Haaretz, which is Israel's version of the New York Times. They actually found a tweet. I mean, not a tweet, a statement from 2019, just a few years ago, from Netanyahu saying that the best thing for us to do is to fund Hamas. And so who exactly is Hamas? Hamas is one of the two major political parties in Palestine. They were funded in 1987 during an uprising against Israel's occupation of Gaza and the West Bank. They were originally a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood that favors Islamist principles. They believe that, all governments should be Islamist governments. We consider them a terrorist organization. Other Western countries consider them they consider the military wing to be a terrorist group, but the political wing to be just a political party. Now, a recent poll by the Palestinian Center of Policy and Survey found that a third of Palestinians themselves found that the internal and political split between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas is the most damaging development that has happened since 1948. That is us. That is Israel. We did that to them. We did that. We created Hamas to cause that conflict because we did not want Palestinians united. Just like we recreated Al-Qaeda and propped up the Saudis because we didn't want the Arab world united. We purposely put Saudi Arabia and amplified their form of Wahhabist Islam because we knew it would keep the Islamic world agitated and fighting each other, but it's come back to bite us in the behind. You see how this works? A lot of this comes from blowback from things that the British Empire did in the early 20th century and things that we are doing now. So Hamas receives a lot of backing from Iran, which contributes funds, weapons, and training to Hamas. Turkey insists they only support Hamas politically, but they have also been accused of funding Hamas's, military wing or the terrorist wing, depending on who you ask. And so this is how you end up with the group that committed that action on Saturday. Again, you get Israel and the United States amplifying a radical wing, thinking it would be better to cause dissension within a group that we are trying to control, and it ends up being blowback. Now, all this, the Palestinian Authority basically controlled the Gaza Strip until 2005. Now, in 2005, under international and domestic pressures, Israel withdrew around 10,000 Israeli settlers and its military forces from Gaza, leaving the enclave to be governed by the Palestinian Authority, which also controlled parts of the West Bank. And here we go. We start meddling again. So George W. Bush gets in office and says, hey, you guys should have elections now. Because he said the same thing in Iraq. You guys have to have elections now because we're America and we are pro-democracy. Well, guess who wins the elections? Hamas wins the elections, everybody. Yay! And they actually did win. They actually did win, in spite of the fact that the United States was propping up the other party, the Fatah party of Mahmoud Abbas, and Jimmy Carter our former president, whose birthday we just celebrated, I think it was last week or the week before last, in the Happy Happies, he went to Gaza to monitor the elections, and he declared that the elections were honest and fair. But guess who didn't want to accept them as honest and fair? George W. Bush. No, he said, yeah, we had these elections and Hamas won, so we can't have that. We can't have that. So once Hamas won the election, Israel and the United States imposed this brutal economic blockade that we have now. David Cameron, who was the Prime Minister of England, a conservative Prime Minister of England, said that Gaza is the world's largest open-air prison. You have 2.2 million people in prison, everybody. Half of them are children. Whew. So everything collapses during the Bush administration because they refused to acknowledge Hamas, and because them and Israel started the blockade against the Palestinians. So in 2008, by 2008, there is a 23-day war, and that war with Hamas and Israel ended in kind of a ceasefire until 2012, and then there was an 8-day war. And in 2014, there was another skirmish, which was like a 50-day long war, and it focused on it was either violations of ceasefire on the Israeli side, and sometimes on the Hamas side, that rockets were being fired, but eventually even that ended with a ceasefire and a tentative stalemate. Now, despite pleas from the United Nations and other human rights groups, Israel has maintained a land, air, and sea blockade on Gaza ever since. It has had a devastating effect on Palestinians. Israel says that the blockade, which gave control of Gaza's borders and is also enforced by Egypt, is necessary to protect Israeli citizens from Hamas. The Red Cross considers it illegal and says it violates the Geneva Convention. The UN and other human rights groups cite the blockade as illegal and consider Gaza to be under military occupation by Israel. Human Rights Watch calls it an open-air prison. That's what it's called. Israel prohibits Palestinians from entering or leaving the area at all, except in extremely rare cases, including urgent, life-threatening medical conditions and a very short list of merchants. There are certain roads you're not even allowed to drive on if you're Palestinian. You can't even drive on certain roads. They are just built for the settlers. Now, Israelis, Jews, and foreigners are not subject to any of these restrictions and are free to travel in and out of Gaza. So what does that sound like? That's a two-tiered society, everybody. That's a two-tiered society. Israel's 16-year blockade has destroyed Gaza's economy. The employment rates are over about 50%, according to the World Bank. About half of the people are unemployed. 65% of the population lives below the poverty line. 63% of the people in Gaza are deemed food insecure by the World Food Program. Remember, half of this is children. Half of this is children. Gaza is one of the most densely populated places on Earth. It is more densely populated, I believe, than Tokyo. It's only 25 miles, 5 miles by 25 miles. That's a very small place. That's why you see Israel saying, get out, telling the Gaza people, we're going to destroy your neighborhood, get out. Dude, there's only a few places you can go. So, anyway, while this is happening, there's been increasing violence between Palestinians and Jewish settlers because that's a big part of this. These settlements these illegal settlements that Israel keeps building that the entire world is saying are illegal. Not me, not crazy leftists. The entire world. Human Rights Watch, the United Nations, people like that, you know. Just a year ago in January, you had an Israeli military operation in a refugee camp in Jenin where 9 Palestinians were murdered. 9. And notice, you didn't see anything about this. You don't see anything about those victims on TV. 9 Palestinians died. And the next day, you had a Palestinian gunman who, in retaliation, went into a synagogue in retaliation and killed 7 people, including children. So during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, Palestinian worshipers barricaded themselves inside the mosque. Israeli police stormed the site, used stun grenades, tear gas, sponge-tip bullets, indiscriminately beat Muslim worshipers in a mosque, including elderly people and women with batons and rifle butts. And who's saying that? Crazy leftist? Or, you know, Russia? Or somebody? No. The UN Human Rights Office said that. United Nations. And not only that, the United Nations has condemned Israel in 2022 more than every other country in the world combined. Combined. And people always go, well, why haven't they tried, the Palestinians tried nonviolence? They have. And a lot of their supporters have tried nonviolence. There was a BDS movement, the boycott, divest, sanction movement. But Israel and all of its stands in this country and in the West said that if you support BDS, which is completely nonviolent, you're an anti-Semite. So you're not allowed to boycott anything or not spend your money with Israeli businesses. The Palestinians had a great march of return, right? These were demonstrations that were held each Friday on the Gaza Strip near the Gaza-Israel border in March of 2018 to December 2019. And all they did was march peacefully. And guess what happened? Israeli forces killed 223 people. 223 Palestinians. Children, elderly people, people marching. All the demonstrators were demanding is that the Palestinian refugees be allowed to return to land that they were displaced from, that is now Israel. They protested peacefully against Israel's land, air, sea blockade of the Gaza Strip and the United States recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, which Donald Trump did, you know, because Donald Trump, you know, loves the, you know, he's very much, him and Benjamin Netanyahu are basically the same guy. So if you want to know who's in charge of Israel, it's basically the Israeli Donald Trump. A corrupt bully. That's who's in charge of Israel. And so him and Netanyahu get along swimmingly. Donald Trump actually had a 70% approval rating in Israel. 70%. They actually named a whole neighborhood in Israel after Trump. It's called Trump Heights. I am not joking. You can look this up for yourselves. Google it. I swear, I am not BSing you. Ooh. So this is getting ugly. How this is going is it looks like we are being overwhelmed. First, Ukraine. We're seeing the coups in Africa, in the Sahel region, where all these Western governments are being thrown out, and Russia's helping a lot of them. Wagner helped a lot of those Africans get free from the French. And we're seeing rapid de-dollarization across the world. So this is going to get ugly for us. This is really getting ugly for us, everybody. Our government, and I tell you every week, our government are full of, I don't want to say crazy people. They are not crazy. They are greedy. They are sociopathic, probably psychopathic, if you can be both. These are people who are wrong. They have led us into all these wars and conflict. Our military is overextended. Financially, it's about to hit the fan in this country. Now all these countries, especially in the West, I mean in South America, in Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East, are starting to de-dollarize. They don't want anything to do with us anymore. They see America as the bully. They don't see America as the good guy. And they don't want us, they don't want to deal with us financially any more than they have to. That is going to cause a lot of economic strife here. Things are going to cost a lot more here very soon. So buckle up. Save your money, whatever little monies you got, save your money. Okay? Don't make any big stupid purchases, because it could be going down very soon. The signals we're getting from Iran, Syria, and Lebanon is that if Israel tries to occupy Gaza, there is a decision to open all fronts against Israel. That means war in the Middle East and direct American intervention. Whew. Oh boy. Oh boy. Oh boy. All right, folks. In about 20 minutes, we're going to talk to Mario Longoni. But first and foremost, happy happies. We'll be right back after these.